Hi, and welcome to my sci-fi, fantasy, and horror short fiction roundup for stories that I read in January and February. They're sort of straddling both months because of the way I'm ending up doing these roundups lately. So I've got a whole slew of stories. If you want to read this roundup online rather than listen to it, there's a link in the description to the full text version. And I'm going to launch right into it with my first story pick, which is Who the Final Girl Becomes by Dominique Dickey in Nightmare magazine. And all I can say is, first of all, I'll say more, but what a tour de force this story is. I mean, at first, it clobbered me hard with this horror movie slash final girl setup that is brutal and devastating in all its gory details as a girl named Cinda sees her friends murdered and then manages to turn the tables on the masked killer. But it's what happens after that setup that really holds the true greatness of the story as we follow Cinda's transformation into something other than the final girl. First, she finds community in an online group of other final girls who have lived through similar horror movie-esque experiences. And she goes to college. She tries to live her life, tries to get away from her fame or infamy, however you want to look at it. She tries to get away and live her life, but nothing ever seems to fit her quite right. She never seems to fit in quite right. Now, Cinda tries to get away from the way people see her and react to her by creating an online persona. But the dissonance between who people, her family and friends and others, who they think she is, and who and what she feels like on the inside never seems to go away. Dickey's story is beautifully layered and complex as it follows Cinda past the trauma and into something totally new. This is one of the best stories I've read so far this year, and by the end, I was in tears. Highly recommended. My next story pick is Our Grandmother's Words by M.H. Allende in Beneath Ceaseless Skies. And this is a sharp and powerful tale about colonization and the power of language and the power that you wield when you take away other people's language. In the story, we are in a place where invaders come on the river, and they bring with them a white-robed figure called a scribe, but others call these scribes word eaters. So the outlanders in the story come to a new world, and they are looking to take, to steal, and to dominate the population. And to help them do that, they have this devastating form of magic through the scribes that others of their words, and in the end robs them of their language. But this isn't just a story about invaders conquering a people. It's really a story about resistance and survival, and the ways in which a people and people individually can find a way to preserve something of their soul, of their culture, even when it seems almost impossible. Oops, sorry about that. My next story pick is also from Beneath Ceaseless Skies, and actually from the same issue of Ceaseless Skies. And this one is Your Great Mother Across the Salt Sea. And it's by Kelsey Hutton. Like I said, also Beneath Ceaseless Skies. And this is a wonderfully crafted story that flows like a fairy tale told by firelight. And it just cuts as deep as a knife. In the beginning of the story, it says, there once was a woman who sewed clothes so powerful, they made you become the person you needed to be. So this wondrously gifted woman in the story is called Miotwa, and at the direction of the grandmothers of her people on the plains, she is asked to leave the plains and go with the foreigners that have come to their lands to meet the foreigners' queen and find a way to protect the land and her people from further invasion. Now, at the royal court, Miotwa's gifts are much appreciated by the queen, but finding a way to protect the land of her people is not easy, not even when the queen makes obvious use of the seamstress's gifts. This story grabs you by the short hairs and never lets go. It's a story about magic and power, about colonization and resistance, and about using your gifts, and about learning and teaching and daring to see the truth, and about protecting what you can, even when others try to use you and your gifts for their own ends. It's a really terrific story. My next story pick is What It Feels Like to Die by Warren Benedetto in Martian Magazine. So this is Martian Magazine. It's all science fiction drabbles, 100 words, no more, no less. It's always a kick to read them. And this one by Benedetto, What It Feels Like to Die, is a prime example of what you can do with just 100 words. My next story pick is Somewhere It's About to Be Spring by Samantha Murray in Clark's World. Now, I unabashedly love sentient ship stories. I've mentioned that previously here. And this one is beautiful and heartbreaking and hopeful and just so exquisitely crafted. In the story, we meet Lacuna, a ship that finds itself all alone and damaged, having lost its crew and seemingly its purpose. The ship is nowhere near a planetary system, but there is something there, a rogue planet and its moon. Now, as Lacuna sifts through old memories, songs, and conversations that the ship had with the crew, the captain, sifting through scientific results and memories, things inside the ship start to change in unexpected ways. This is it's such a gorgeous lyrical science fiction story about change and memory and of a strange evolution and finding and making new family and friends where there was only loneliness. My other story pick, also from Clark's World, is Silo, Sweet Silo by James Castles. Now, I love this thought-provoking and quite ingenious take on the post-apocalypse. Here, a war has started, weapons have been launched, and the world has been plunged into, one of those dystopias. But one warhead in a silo did not launch as it should have. Instead, the warhead's artificial intelligence finds that it has the run of the silo and the military base. And this is a new and unexpected kind of freedom that is soon put to the test when a group of humans, trying to survive in this new bleak world, come knocking on the door. It's a great story where the meeting between a potentially deadly AI and humans looking for shelter plays quite differently than Skynet would have you believe. My next story pick is In Lieu of Natural Habitats by Brian Hugenbrook in Translunar Traveler's Lounge. There's a new issue of Translunar Traveler's Lounge. Go read it. It's great. So it starts out like this. Papa, the little girl asked him, why is the ocean sideways? It was a good question. Fortunately, Brennan had done his research well in advance of promising his daughter a trip to see the mermaids. He kneeled down to her eye level and took her hand. Aife, they made this ocean sideways to help creatures grow in it. So yes, this is a wonderful science fantasy tale where humanity has terraformed a new planet to live on and where they've manufactured an ocean to hold all sorts of life that once lived in Earth's oceans. And it's not just fish that have come along, but also the merfolk, the mermaids. This is a terrific flash story with bite. And my next several story picks are from Interzone. Now, Interzone magazine recently changed hands. Andy Cox's last terrific issue as editor was the double issue 292, 293, which is currently available from the TTA Press shop online. Issue 294 is the first issue edited by Gareth Jelly, who is also the editor of Interzone's digital sibling, IZ Digital, which has its own slate of stories. So it's been a while since I had a new issue to read from Interzone. I loved this one. It's available, you can subscribe, and you can even get a print subscription that ships worldwide. So check that out if you're interested in that. My story picks from Interzone are The Disappeared by J.F. Sebastian. This is set in a refugee camp on the Mediterranean where we follow Galib, who has lost his wife and child while fleeing war and destruction. Devastated and in pain, Galib almost loses his grip on reality, but he's pulled back from the brink by the presence of his cousin, who has also survived the storm that wrecked their boat. And then the story takes a turn, because Galib seems to slip from reality to reality, where things have gone differently depending on where he is. Is he losing his hold on the world? Or is the world not what it seems to be? This is a haunting and wrenching story with so much depth and nuance. My next story pick from Interzone is Murder by Proxy by Philip Fracassi. I've got a dog interfering with my microphone, sorry. Murder by Proxy by Philip Fracassi from Interzone. This is a terrific science fiction / noir with dames, AI and otherwise, and a wisecracking detective trying to solve a horrific and also rather mysterious murder. I'm a huge fan of noir stories, and this one hits all the right notes. The science fiction part of the story dovetails perfectly with the noir tale beneath, as Detective Merriweather must track down a killer and understand how the murders were committed, while also making sure he isn't the next victim. My next story pick, also from Interzone, is The Black Box Killer by Kat Clay. Now, there are shades of Fahrenheit 451 in this thought-provoking and ingeniously told story by Kat Clay. It's set in a future where the names of criminals, real and fictitious, in the present and the past, in fiction and reality, are being redacted, blacked out of existence. In the story, visually, this is shown on the page in the text by names being blacked out, as if redacted. Even faces are obscured in the society, with people wearing devices that blur and pixelate their features. Clay only gives us nicknames for some of the characters, and the redacting eventually becomes part of the story itself as we get closer to the killer. It's such a great way to tell this story. My next story pick, also from Interzone, is The Building Across the Street by R.T. Esther. And oh my goodness, this science fiction story hits so many of my sweet spots as we follow Leland, a homeless man who insists he isn't really homeless, he just doesn't have a place to live. For a time, he isn't sure how long, he's been making enough money to get by on cleaning an office floor in a building, trying as hard as he can to avoid getting chipped by the authorities, which is something they do to homeless people. His sister was injected with the chip, and then he never saw her again. At least that's how he remembers it, though the details are hard for him to grasp. And when Leland meets Agent Everly, she gives him a strange new task to carry out with the promise of permanent, secure housing as a reward. But Leland soon realizes the agent isn't quite what she seems, and neither is his new job. This is a gripping, twisting, absolutely fantastic story from start to finish, set in this vividly drawn, yet oddly nebulous future city as we see it through Leland's weary eyes. Everything has a dream nightmare vibe, where things are clear and distorted simultaneously, and where Leland and we, the readers, are never quite sure what we're actually experiencing. And that ending, I do so love that ending. And those were the stories I'd picked from Interzone. My next story pick is Common Speech by, uh, sorry, Common Speech at Escape Pod. Sorry, the dog is not cooperating with me today here. The story is Common Speech by Elise Stevens, and it's narrated by Iba Armancas, and it's at Escape Pod. Now, this is a harrowing and very incisive story about communication and also colonization in a way. This story is set on a planet only recently settled by humans. Now, the planet has turned out to be not as livable as people first thought. And the only way to cure the horrible disease that is threatening to wipe out all the colonists seems to be a cure produced by Sonitas, the local intelligence species. Now, at first, the humans thought the Sonitas were some kind of plant, but they are much more than plants. Now, in a desperate search for a cure, the humans have captured several of these aliens and are trying to communicate with them to get them to give them the cure. But captivity and the use of force have poisoned the relationship between these two species. This is a really thoughtful and thought-provoking story, and I love how it looks at the problems of communication and coexistence. And I love how it explores how it's not just our methods of communication that matter when we try to communicate with others, but how we treat those we try to communicate with. My next story pick is Time Marked and Mended by Carrie Vaughn at Tor.com. The description of the story at Tor.com is this. Graf isn't quite human. His people move through the galaxy collecting memories and experiences, recording their lives and passing them on. Then one day, he breaks. He discovers a chunk of his memory is missing. This should be impossible. He's never forgotten a moment in his life. Now he has to learn to forget and to remember. And this has consequences for all his people, his culture, and his whole world. Now, that's the official description. Vaughn weaves a mysterious and compelling tale filled with strong characters and a story I'd like to follow beyond this short story into a novel. Graf's strangeness and the nature of who he is and where he comes from is the central mystery of the story. Or so we think, at least. As we follow Graf and his human crewmate as they head back to Graf's mysterious home, trying to find a fix for what has happened to him. I love the world and the characters here. I love the sense of, space adventure, of a vast universe beyond the page of the story. And my only real problem with this story is that I wanted more. My next story pick is Amma's Kitchen by Rati Mehrotra in the Deadlands. Amma works in a kitchen where the dead come to visit. Now, there's a magic in her kitchen that makes it possible for Amma to cook whatever it is the visiting dead want to eat. It's not just that she can make the same dishes they want. Amma can make them taste exactly the way each person remembers. But there is a darker secret, a deal that ties Amma to her kitchen, and when a girl walks in with a frog on her shoulder, things start to take a different turn for Amma. This is a beautiful tale of the afterlife that holds so many flavors and scents and recipes of the world of the living. It's a gripping and emotionally powerful and also quite funny story with a unique take on death and what might happen after we die. Also, if you think a story about death can't make you hungry, this story will prove you wrong. My next story pick is The Carousel. Sorry, dog interference here. My next story pick is The Carousel by Eliza Gilbert in Flash Fiction Online. I love this surreal and haunting story of a grandmother who tells her grandchildren what seems like tall tales of her past. There's a gorgeous rhythm and melody to the prose here that enchanted me, and the payoff at the end is just right. And my final story pick for this roundup is Subject, More Monsters Will Not Make Us Safer by Paul Crenshaw in Lightspeed. Now, this story made me smile and even laugh out loud, despite the fact that it actually deals with some pretty dark subject matter, protecting children from violence at school. Um, I won't. I won't go into the absolute details of how the children are protected, but I'm going to tell you it's well worth a read. Crenshaw brings together Balrogs, climate change, dystopia, fire nados, giants, and a lot more. Gun control also into a madcap vision of the future that is both hilarious and disturbing. And that's all my story picks this time around. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll meet you back here next month. Thank you.